The transport shuttle's engine screamed as it descended through the toxic atmosphere of Kepler 442c. Lieutenant Sarah Chen pressed her face against the porthole, watching the barren landscape rush past below. Red dust storms swirled across cracked earth that stretched endlessly toward jagged mountain ranges. Nothing lived here. Nothing could live here. "Final approach to drop zone 77 Alpha," announced the pilot, his voice crackling through the intercom. "Environmental suits mandatory beyond this point. Radiation levels are off the charts." Sarah adjusted her combat armor one last time, checking the seals on her environmental systems. The weight of her equipment pack felt heavier than usual, loaded with enough supplies to last exactly 30 days. After that, she was on her own. Why her? She had asked Admiral Morrison during the briefing 3 days ago. Why send just one person to establish a forward operating base on the most hostile planet in the sector? The Admiral's weathered face had remained expressionless. "Because the Zephyrian Empire expects us to send a full battalion. They're watching our fleet movements, counting our ships. When they see one small transport heading to Kepler 442c, they'll assume it's a survey mission. By the time they realize what you've accomplished, it will be too late." The shuttle touched down with a bone-jarring impact, kicking up clouds of crimson dust that obscured the viewports. Through her suit's heads-up display, Sarah watched the atmospheric readings scroll past. Sulfur dioxide concentrations that would kill an unprotected human in minutes. Surface temperature fluctuations between -40 and +60 degrees Celsius. Radiation levels that would cook organic tissue within hours. "This is as close as I can get," the pilot called back. "The landing beacon you requested is already deployed about 2 kilometers north of here. Good luck, Lieutenant. See you in 6 months." Sarah grabbed her gear and moved toward the shuttle's rear hatch. The hydraulics hissed as the ramp lowered, revealing the hellscape that would be her home for the next half-year. The wind howled across the wasteland, carrying particles of glass-sharp sand that rattled against her armor like angry insects. She stepped onto the alien soil, her boots sinking slightly into the loose regolith. Behind her, the shuttle's engines spun up again, and within minutes the aircraft disappeared into the rust-colored sky. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the whistle of wind through distant rock formations. Sarah activated her suit's navigation system and began the trek toward the landing beacon. Each step was a struggle against the shifting sand and the relentless gravity that pulled at her equipment. Her breathing echoed inside her helmet as she climbed over boulder fields and descended into dry creek, beds that hadn't seen water for millions of years. The beacon stood exactly where the coordinates indicated, a metallic spire rising 3 meters from the ground. Sarah approached it cautiously, her scanner sweeping for any signs of indigenous life or Zephyrian surveillance equipment. The readings came back clean, but she knew that meant nothing on a world this hostile. She activated the beacon's storage compartment and retrieved the contents. Inside were compressed building materials, terraforming seeds, atmospheric processors, and most importantly, a quantum communicator that would allow her to contact Earth once per week for exactly 3 minutes. The rest of the time, she would be completely alone. Sarah selected a defensible position in a shallow valley surrounded by rocky outcroppings. The natural formations would provide some protection from the worst storms while offering multiple escape routes if enemies discovered her location. She began the arduous process of establishing her base camp, working methodically despite the exhaustion that crept through her body. The habitat module unfolded like origami, its smart materials automatically sealing against the toxic atmosphere. Life support systems hummed to life, scrubbing poison from the air and generating a breathable environment within the cramped space. Sarah finally removed her helmet and breathed deeply, tasting recycled air that somehow felt like freedom. Over the following days, she expanded her small sanctuary, solar collectors deployed across the valley floor, their surfaces designed to function even under the planet's dim, radiation-soaked sun. Water extractors began pulling moisture from the hostile atmosphere, filtering out toxins and storing precious liquid in underground tanks. Most importantly, she activated the first atmospheric processor, a device no larger than a briefcase that began the slow work of converting poisonous gases into something approaching breathable air. The work was backbreaking, made worse by the planet's unpredictable weather patterns. Dust storms would rage for hours, forcing Sarah to take shelter while her equipment was buried under meters of debris. She would emerge afterward to dig everything out and start again, her determination growing stronger with each setback. 3 weeks into her mission, Sarah achieved her first breakthrough. The atmospheric processor had created a bubble of semi-breathable air, extending roughly 50 meters from her habitat. She could work outside for short periods without her full environmental suit, wearing only a basic respirator and radiation shielding. It wasn't much, but it represented the first step toward making this wasteland habitable. She stood at the edge of her tiny oasis, looking out across the endless expanse of desolation. Somewhere out there, the Zephyrian Empire was planning their next move against humanity. They believed humans were weak, unable to adapt to harsh conditions. They thought the species that had crawled out of Earth's gravity well would crumble when faced with truly hostile environments. Sarah smiled grimly as she watched her atmospheric processors work. In 5 months and 1 week, a transport would return to extract her. The Zephyrians expected to find either a corpse or an abandoned survey station. Instead, they would discover something that would shake the foundation of their beliefs about human capabilities. The real work was just beginning. 2 months into her mission, Sarah's small bubble of breathable air had expanded into something resembling a proper settlement. The atmospheric processors worked around the clock, their steady humming a comforting soundtrack to her daily routine. Where once there had been only toxic wasteland, patches of modified grass now grew in carefully tended plots around her habitat modules. The transformation had not gone unnoticed. Sarah first detected the surveillance, drones on a Tuesday morning while calibrating her long-range sensors. The contacts appeared as tiny blips on her display, moving in coordinated patterns high in the upper atmosphere. Zephyrian reconnaissance craft, no doubt reporting back to their fleet commanders about the impossible changes occurring on Kepler 442c. She could have hidden her work, could have powered down the processors and waited for the drones to pass. Instead, Sarah made a decision that would define everything that followed. She activated additional atmospheric processors, deploying them in a deliberate pattern that would be visible from orbit. If the Zephyrians wanted to watch, she would give them something worth seeing. The response came 3 days later. A Zephyrian landing craft descended through the storm clouds, its sleek hull cutting through the toxic atmosphere with practiced ease. Sarah watched through her perimeter cameras as the ship touched down 2 kilometers from her settlement, disgorging a squad of armored aliens onto the hostile surface. Zephyrians were tall, reptilian creatures adapted for high-gravity worlds. Their natural armor could withstand temperature extremes that would kill most species, and their redundant organ systems made them incredibly difficult to injure. They were also arrogant, convinced that their biological superiority made them the natural rulers of the galaxy. The squad moved across the wasteland with military precision, their energy weapons scanning for threats. Through her surveillance network, Sarah watched their leader examine the expanding zone of breathable atmosphere with what appeared to be confusion. She activated her external speakers and addressed them in perfect Zephyrian. "Welcome to New Eden Station," her voice echoed across the valley. "I am Lieutenant Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Force. You are trespassing on human territory." The Zephyrian squad leader raised his weapon, searching for the source of the transmission. His response came back in heavily accented English. "Human, you will surrender yourself for questioning. This world belongs to the Empire by right of discovery." Sarah laughed, the sound carrying across the transformed landscape. "Discovery? You mean the world you declared uninhabitable in your survey reports? The world your empire specifically avoided because it was too dangerous for your precious soldiers?" She stepped out of her habitat wearing only light atmospheric gear, no longer needing the full environmental suit that had kept her alive during those first desperate weeks. The Zephyrians' weapons tracked her movement, but she could see the confusion in their body language. According to everything they knew about human physiology, she should be dead within minutes in this environment. "Impossible," the squad leader hissed. "No carbon-based life can survive these conditions." "You're right," Sarah replied, walking calmly toward the center of her settlement. "No life as you understand it can survive here. But humans don't just survive, we adapt. We change our environment to suit us, and when that fails, we change ourselves to suit our environment." She gestured toward the expanding green zones where Earth plants had been modified to process the planet's toxic atmosphere. 6 weeks ago, this was dead rock and poison air. Now it's farmland. In 6 months, this entire continent will be habitable. In 2 years, your empire will face a human colony armed with weapons forged from materials you thought were worthless. The Zephyrian squad leader's scales darkened with anger. You lie. One human cannot accomplish such things. One human accomplished this, Sarah corrected. Imagine what 1,000 humans could do. Imagine what 1,000,000 could do. The standoff stretched for several minutes, neither side willing to make the first aggressive move. Sarah knew the Zephyrians were calculating their options, trying to determine if eliminating her would solve their problem or simply postpone the inevitable. She also knew they were transmitting everything back to their fleet commanders, spreading word of humanity's incredible adaptability throughout the Zephyrian command structure. Finally, the squad leader lowered his weapon slightly. The Empire will not allow this colonization to proceed. The Empire doesn't have a choice, Sarah replied. Your laws recognize the right of any species to claim uninhabitable worlds through successful terraforming. This world was officially classified as uninhabitable by your own survey teams. Even if you kill me today, the legal precedent has been established. She could see the alien's mind working through the implications. Zephyrian society was built on strict adherence to law and precedent. They had spent centuries conquering habitable worlds through legal technicalities and superior military force. Now they faced an enemy that could make uninhabitable worlds livable, effectively expanding the available territory in the galaxy by orders of magnitude. The squad leader made a gesture that Sarah recognized as a formal salute between military equals. You have earned the Empire's respect, human. Your death will be honored. My death will be avenged, Sarah corrected, and the survivors will remember that the Zephyrian Empire chose war over cooperation. The aliens withdrew as suddenly as they had arrived, their transport disappearing into the rust-colored sky. Sarah watched them go with mixed emotions. She had hoped for more time before direct contact, but the encounter had served its purpose. Word would spread through the Zephyrian fleet about the lone human who had transformed a wasteland into a garden. Over the following weeks, surveillance increased dramatically. Zephyrian ships appeared regularly in the upper atmosphere, monitoring the continued expansion of Sarah's settlement. She made no attempt to hide her activities, instead broadcasting her progress on frequencies she knew the aliens were monitoring. The atmospheric processors had expanded breathable air across nearly 100 square kilometers. Earth plants grew in neat rows alongside native vegetation that had been modified to process toxins. Underground, vast hydroponic facilities produced food while automated. Manufacturing systems turned raw materials into construction components. Sarah's weekly reports to Earth. Command became increasingly detailed as her settlement grew. She described new terraforming techniques, cataloged useful minerals, and documented atmospheric changes that were occurring faster than anyone had thought possible. Most importantly, she reported the Zephyrian response and their growing alarm at humanity's adaptability. By the end of her 3rd month, Sarah was no longer alone. Automated construction drones had assembled a proper research station, complete with laboratories, manufacturing facilities, and defensive systems. The settlement could now sustain a small population of researchers and engineers, but Sarah remained the only human on the planet. She stood atop the observation tower she had built overlooking her transformed valley, watching storm clouds gather on the horizon. Soon, the Zephyrians would move beyond surveillance to direct action. When that happened, she would be ready. The attack came during the planet's artificial dawn, when the modified atmosphere scattered the distant sun's light into something resembling Earth's morning sky. Sarah was working in the hydroponics bay when her defense systems screamed warnings across every communication channel. Through the transparent aluminum windows, she watched 3 Zephyrian assault craft descend from the cloud layer, their weapon systems already charging for bombardment. She had exactly 90 seconds before the first missiles would impact. Sarah's fingers flew across the control interfaces, activating defensive protocols she had hoped never to use. Hidden weapons emplacements rose from concealed positions throughout the valley, their targeting systems locking onto the incoming threats. Shield generators hummed to life, creating overlapping energy barriers above the most critical facilities. The first wave of Zephyrian missiles struck the outer perimeter with devastating force. Explosions lit up the morning sky as Sarah's point defense systems intercepted most of the incoming ordnance, but several impacts got through. The atmospheric processing station on the eastern ridge disappeared in a ball of superheated plasma, taking with it 3 months of careful atmospheric work. Sarah gritted her teeth and returned fire, Her defensive weapons had been designed specifically to counter Zephyrian technology, using intelligence gathered during humanity's first encounters with the Empire. Particle beams lanced upward, striking one of the assault craft and sending it spinning out of control into the rocky mountains beyond her settlement. The remaining two ships adjusted their attack patterns, clearly surprised by the level of resistance they faced. Through her communication systems, Sarah could hear their pilots reporting to their fleet commanders in rapid Zephyrian, their voices filled with confusion and growing respect. "The human has significant defensive capabilities," one pilot transmitted. "Request immediate reinforcement." "Negative," came the reply from orbit. "Complete your mission with available resources. The Empire cannot appear weak before a single human." Sarah smiled grimly as she translated the exchange. Zephyrian pride would be their downfall, just as she had hoped. Instead of calling for overwhelming force, they would attempt to defeat her through individual excellence, giving her opportunities to eliminate their forces piecemeal. The second assault craft came in low, using the mountain ranges for cover as it approached her main habitat complex. Sarah tracked its approach through seismic sensors buried throughout the valley, waiting until the perfect moment before activating her trump card. The entire western slope of the valley erupted as hidden mining charges detonated in sequence. Tons of rock and debris launched skyward, creating an artificial landslide that caught the Zephyrian ship in a cascade of destruction. The pilot attempted to pull up at the last second, but the assault craft clipped a boulder the size of a transport vehicle and cartwheeled into the valley floor. The third ship immediately began evasive maneuvers, its pilot clearly shaken by the loss of both wingmates. Sarah could have destroyed it easily with her remaining defenses, but instead she activated her communication array and broadcast on standard diplomatic frequencies. "Zephyrian pilot, this is Lieutenant Chen. Your mission has failed. Return to your fleet and inform your commanders that New Eden Station is under the protection of the Terran Defense Force. Any further attacks will be considered acts of war." The response came back in heavily accented English. "Human, you fight with honor, but the Empire cannot allow your presence to continue. We will return with greater force." "When you return," Sarah replied, "you will find a fortress where once there was only empty land. Think carefully about whether your Empire wants to begin a war it cannot win." The surviving assault craft climbed rapidly through the atmosphere, disappearing into the orbital traffic patterns where the Zephyrian fleet waited. Sarah watched it go while simultaneously assessing the damage to her settlement. The loss of the eastern atmospheric processor was serious but not catastrophic. More importantly, the attack had given her valuable intelligence about Zephyrian tactics and capabilities. Over the following days, Sarah worked with desperate efficiency to repair and expand her defenses. Automated manufacturing systems ran around the clock, producing additional weapons emplacements, shield generators, and sensor arrays. The settlement's defensive perimeter expanded to cover the entire valley and the surrounding mountain passes. She also began construction of her most ambitious project yet. Deep beneath the settlement's main complex, excavation drones carved out a vast underground facility. The project consumed enormous amounts of energy and raw materials, but Sarah knew it would be essential for what was coming. The Zephyrian response was swift and predictable. 3 days after the failed assault, a full battle group appeared in orbit around Kepler 442c. Sarah monitored their communications as they prepared for a coordinated bombardment that would eliminate her settlement and everything she had built. What they found, instead, was a transformed world. In the days since the attack, Sarah's atmospheric processors had been working overtime. The bubble of breathable air now extended across hundreds of square kilometers, and Earth vegetation had taken root in soil that had been lifeless for millions of years. From orbit, the planet no longer appeared as a barren wasteland, but as a world in the early stages of terraforming. More importantly, Sarah had activated a network of communication beacons hidden throughout the mountain ranges. Each beacon transmitted a simple message in every known galactic language, including Zephyrian. The message identified New Eden Station as a sovereign human colony, established according to galactic law on a previously uninhabitable world. The legal implications hit the Zephyrian fleet like a shockwave. Under their own laws, any species that successfully terraformed an uninhabitable world gained permanent settlement rights. The Zephyrians had written these laws themselves, assuming no other species possessed the technology or determination to claim the galaxy's dead worlds. Sarah listened with satisfaction as the fleet commanders debated their options. Some advocated for immediate bombardment, arguing that human expansion had to be stopped regardless of legal consequences. Others pointed out that violating their own terraforming laws would undermine the legal framework that legitimized Zephyrian rule throughout the galaxy. The debate raged for hours, broadcast on frequencies that Sarah had no difficulty intercepting. Finally, a decision emerged from the flagship. The Zephyrians would attempt one final assault using ground forces only. If that failed, they would withdraw and refer the matter to the Galactic Council for legal arbitration. Sarah knew the ground assault would be far more dangerous than the air attack. Zephyrian ground troops were heavily armored and armed with weapons designed to breach the strongest fortifications. They were also patient and methodical, unlike the pilots who had attacked with typical Zephyrian aggression. But Sarah had advantages the aliens could not anticipate. She knew the terrain intimately, having spent months mapping every rock formation and mineral deposit in the valley. Her defensive systems had been designed specifically to counter Zephyrian ground tactics. Most importantly, she was fighting for more than just her own survival. As the sun set over New Eden Station, Sarah made her final preparations for the coming battle. The Zephyrians would land at dawn, expecting to find a desperate human clinging to life in a hostile environment. Instead, they would face an enemy who had turned that hostile environment into the ultimate defensive advantage. The real test of human adaptability was about to begin. The Zephyrian ground assault began before dawn with an orbital bombardment that lit up the sky like artificial lightning. Sarah watched from her underground command center as the enemy fleet pounded the valley with precisely targeted strikes, attempting to eliminate her defensive positions without destroying the atmospheric processors that proved human terraforming capability. The bombardment was impressive, but ultimately futile. Sarah had anticipated this tactic and built her critical systems deep underground, connected by tunnels that could withstand direct orbital strikes. When the barrage ended, her defensive networks came online exactly as planned, revealing no significant damage to the aliens monitoring from above. 3 landing craft touched down simultaneously at predetermined coordinates around the valley's perimeter. Sarah counted 60 Zephyrian soldiers as they disembarked, each one wearing powered armor that amplified their already formidable physical capabilities. Their formation was textbook perfect, with overlapping fields of fire and mutually supporting advanced positions. Through her sensor network, Sarah monitored their approach as they moved methodically toward her settlement. The Zephyrians advanced in classic assault formation, using natural cover while maintaining constant communication with their orbital support. They expected to face automated defenses and perhaps a few desperate humans holding defensive positions. They found something else entirely. The first indication that something was wrong came when the Eastern assault team reached what should have been the valley's edge. Instead of the barren wasteland their orbital surveys had mapped, they found themselves walking through fields of modified Earth vegetation that had grown with impossible speed. Plants that should have taken months to mature were already producing oxygen and filtering toxins from the atmosphere. "Command, this is Eastern Team," the squad leader reported. "The terrain does not match our intelligence data. Vegetation density is far higher than anticipated." Before Orbital Command could respond, the vegetation attacked. Sarah had spent weeks modifying Earth plant genetics, creating hybrid organisms that could thrive in the planet's hostile environment while serving defensive purposes. Vines erupted from the ground around the Zephyrian squad, moving with predatory speed as they sought gaps in the aliens' armor. Thorns sharp enough to pierce metal launched from innocent-looking flowers, while root systems released clouds of spores designed to interfere with Zephyrian respiratory systems. The Eastern team found themselves fighting a forest that had been turned into a weapon. Their energy weapons carved through the attacking plants, but for every vine they destroyed, 2 more took its place. The modified vegetation drew nutrients from the planet's mineral-rich soil, regenerating faster than the Zephyrians could eliminate it. "Fall back to secondary position," the team leader ordered, his voice tight with strain. "Request immediate orbital fire support on coordinates." The request died as communication jammers hidden throughout the valley activated. Sarah had studied Zephyrian military protocols extensively, and she knew they relied heavily on constant communication with Orbital Command. Cut off from their support network, the ground teams would have to operate independently, exactly where Sarah wanted them. The Western and Southern teams fared no better. The Western squad encountered Sarah's mining drones, which had been reprogrammed as mobile weapons platforms. The small machines swarmed the Zephyrians like mechanical insects. Their plasma cutters and drilling equipment turned into close-range weapons that could find gaps in even the most sophisticated armor. The Southern team faced Sarah's most devastating trap. As they approached what appeared to be the settlement's main defensive perimeter, the ground beneath their feet began to shift. Sarah had installed a network of underground atmospheric processors throughout the valley, and she activated them all simultaneously. The sudden release of pressurized gases created sinkholes that swallowed half the squad, while the remainder found themselves standing on unstable ground that could collapse at any moment. From her command center, Sarah watched the 3 assault teams struggle against obstacles they had never trained to face. The Zephyrians were exceptional warriors, but they were fighting an enemy that had turned the entire environment into a weapon. Every step they took carried them deeper into a maze of traps and hazards that adapted to their movements. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. One of the Zephyrian squad leaders, separated from his team by the attacking vegetation, reached Sarah's primary atmospheric processing facility. Instead of attempting to destroy it, he stopped and studied the complex machinery. With obvious fascination, Sarah watched through her cameras as the alien warrior examined the atmospheric processors with the attention of a scientist rather than a soldier. He ran his armored hands over the sleek surfaces, clearly trying to understand how such compact devices could transform an entire planet's atmosphere. On impulse, Sarah activated the facility's external speakers. "Impressive, isn't it?" she said in perfect Zephyrian. "Each processor can convert a cubic kilometer of atmosphere per day. We've been running them for 3 months." The Zephyrian spun toward the sound, his weapon raised but not quite aimed at the speakers. "Human, show yourself. Face me with honor." Sarah considered the request carefully. The warrior's body language suggested curiosity rather than pure aggression, and his examination of the atmospheric processors indicated a scientific mind trapped within military protocol. She made a decision that violated every survival instinct she possessed. The facility's main airlock cycled open, and Sarah emerged wearing only light atmospheric gear. In the modified environment around the processors, she no longer needed full environmental protection. The Zephyrian's weapon tracked her movement but didn't fire. "I am Sub-Commander Crakes of the Imperial Assault Corps," the alien announced formally. "You will surrender your position and submit to interrogation." "I am Lieutenant Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Force," Sarah replied with equal formality. "I am the commanding officer of New Eden Station, and you are trespassing on sovereign human territory." Crakes tilted his head in a gesture Sarah recognized as confusion. "Impossible. This world is classified as uninhabitable. No settlement rights can be claimed on dead worlds." Sarah gestured toward the thriving vegetation that surrounded them. "Does this look like a dead world to you, Sub-Commander? Your own surveys will confirm that this valley now supports a breathable atmosphere across several hundred square kilometers. By your Empire's own laws, successful terraforming establishes permanent settlement rights." The Zephyrian warrior was silent for several minutes, his helmet sensors scanning the transformed environment. Finally, he lowered his weapon completely. "How? Our scientists declared terraforming impossible on worlds with this level of atmospheric toxicity." "Your scientists were wrong," Sarah replied simply. "Human terraforming technology operates on principles your Empire has never encountered. We don't just change hostile environments, we adapt to them and then reshape them to our needs." Crakes made a gesture that Sarah interpreted as respect between equals. "You have accomplished something remarkable, human. But the Empire cannot allow your species to claim the galaxy's uninhabitable worlds. There are too many of them, and your expansion would threaten our territorial integrity." "Then your Empire has a choice," Sarah said. "Accept human colonization of worlds you cannot use, or face a war against a species that can turn any environment into a fortress." The conversation was interrupted by weapon fire from across the valley. The other Zephyrian teams had managed to regroup and were launching a coordinated assault on Sarah's primary habitat complex. Crakes immediately activated his communication system, attempting to contact his scattered forces. "Sub-Commander, Sarah said quietly. "Your teams are walking into a trap that will kill them all. My defensive systems are designed to counter exactly the tactics they're using." Craig studied her carefully. "Why would you warn me?" "Because I'd rather convince your empire that cooperation serves both our interests better than war," Sarah replied. "Call off the assault and I'll allow your forces to withdraw safely." The Zephyrian warrior considered the offer for a long moment. Around them, the sounds of battle grew more intense as his fellow soldiers fought against an environment that had become their enemy. Finally, he activated his emergency broadcast system. "All Imperial forces, this is Sub-Commander Crakes. Cease combat operations immediately and withdraw to extraction coordinates. The human commander has demonstrated that continued assault will result in total casualties." The acknowledgements came back from the surviving team leaders, their voices filled with relief. Within an hour, the Zephyrian forces had withdrawn to their landing craft and departed for orbit. Sarah watched them go, knowing that this encounter had changed everything. The real war was about to begin, but now it would be fought with words and laws rather than weapons and armies. The Galactic Council chambers on Nexus Prime had not seen this level of tension since the Zephyrian Empire first petitioned for membership 3 centuries ago. Representatives from 47 species packed the amphitheater, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony that the universal translators struggled to process into coherent debate. Sarah stood at the human delegation's position, wearing her dress uniform for the first time in 6 months. The journey from Kepler 442c to the galactic capital had taken 3 weeks, during which time her settlement had continued expanding under automated systems. By now, New Eden Station covered nearly 1,000 square kilometers of transformed landscape. Across the chamber, the Zephyrian delegation occupied their traditional seats of honor. Sub-Commander Craig stood among them, having been promoted to full commander after his detailed reports about human terraforming capabilities reached the Imperial High Command. His presence served as a reminder that the Empire now took humanity seriously as a potential threat. "The question before this council," announced the Nixari mediator, her crystalline voice carrying easily through the chamber's acoustic systems, "is whether the human claim to Kepler 442c constitutes legal settlement under established galactic law." The Zephyrian delegate rose first, his scales catching the chamber's artificial light as he addressed the assembly. "Honored representatives, the Empire maintains that no legal settlement can be established on a world classified as uninhabitable by scientific survey. The human presence on Kepler 442c represents illegal occupation of Imperial discovery claims." Sarah remained standing as murmurs rippled through the gallery. The Zephyrian argument was technically sound under traditional interpretations of galactic law, but it ignored the precedent established by successful terraforming operations. She waited for the mediator's signal before responding. "Honored Council," Sarah began, her voice amplified by the chamber's systems. "Humanity presents evidence that Kepler 442c has been successfully terraformed from an uninhabitable wasteland into a thriving ecosystem capable of supporting multiple species." She activated her holographic projector, filling the center of the chamber with images of New Eden Station. The assembled delegates watched in fascination as the display showed the transformation from barren landscape to flourishing settlement. Atmospheric readings scrolled past, documenting the conversion of toxic gases into breathable air across hundreds of square kilometers. These images were recorded over 6 months of continuous terraforming operations. Sarah continued, "Under Section 12 of the Galactic Settlement Accords, any species that successfully renders an uninhabitable world suitable for life gains permanent settlement rights regardless of prior discovery claims." The chamber erupted in excited conversation as representatives consulted their legal databases. Section 12 had been included in the settlement accords as a theoretical provision, since no known species possessed the technology to terraform truly hostile worlds. The Zephyrians themselves had insisted on its inclusion, assuming it would legitimize their claims to worlds they had abandoned as uninhabitable. "The human interpretation is incorrect," the Zephyrian delegate countered. "Section 12 requires proof of sustained habitability, not temporary atmospheric modification. A single human surviving in an artificial environment does not constitute successful terraforming." Sarah smiled, having anticipated this objection. "Commander Crakes of the Imperial Assault Corps conducted a personal inspection of our settlement. Perhaps he would share his observations with the council? All attention turned to the Zephyrian commander, who had clearly not expected to be called as a witness. He rose slowly, his military bearing evident even in the formal setting of the council chambers. Honored representatives, Crakes began carefully. I can confirm that the human settlement supports a breathable atmosphere across several hundred square kilometers. Native vegetation has been successfully modified to process atmospheric toxins, and Earth species have been adapted to thrive in the planet's mineral-rich soil. The terraforming operation is far more extensive than our initial intelligence suggested. The admission sent shockwaves through the Zephyrian delegation. Several representatives began arguing in rapid Zephyrian, their scales shifting color to indicate extreme agitation. Sarah watched their internal debate with interest, knowing that Crakes' testimony had undermined their legal position significantly. Furthermore, Crakes continued, surprising everyone including his own delegation, the human commander demonstrated remarkable restraint during our military encounter. When offered the opportunity to eliminate Imperial forces, she chose instead to facilitate peaceful withdrawal. This suggests that humanity seeks coexistence rather than territorial conquest. The Nexari mediator called for order as the chamber dissolved into dozens of simultaneous conversations. Representatives from various species were clearly reconsidering their positions on human expansion, particularly those who governed uninhabitable worlds within their own territories. The council will now hear testimony from other species regarding human terraforming capabilities, the mediator announced. The Volari Federation has requested permission to present evidence. Sarah felt a surge of hope as the Volari delegate rose. Humanity had maintained positive relations with the Federation for decades, and their support could be crucial in the upcoming vote. The Volari were also known for their scientific expertise, giving their testimony additional weight. Honored Council, the Volari delegate began, her 6 arms gesturing gracefully as she spoke. The Federation has conducted independent analysis of atmospheric data from Kepler 442c. The chemical transformations documented in human reports are scientifically sound and represent genuine terraforming rather than temporary atmospheric modification. She activated her own holographic display, showing detailed molecular analysis of the planet's changing atmosphere. The human settlement has established a self-sustaining ecological system that will continue expanding without external intervention. This exceeds the requirements for legal terraforming under any reasonable interpretation of galactic law. The Zephyrian delegate attempted to object, but was cut off by a representative from the Hegemony Collective. The collective wishes to submit a formal question. If human terraforming claims are rejected, what prevents any species from claiming inhabited worlds as uninhabitable under selective interpretation of survey data? The question struck at the heart of galactic politics. Many species had worlds within their territory that could be classified as marginally habitable, depending on the criteria used. If the Council ruled that terraforming could not establish settlement rights, it would create a precedent that could destabilize territorial claims throughout the galaxy. Sarah recognized the shift in the chamber's mood. What had begun as a simple territorial dispute was now being viewed as a fundamental challenge to the legal framework that governed interspecies relations. She pressed her advantage carefully. The human position is simple, Sarah announced. We claim only worlds that have been formally classified as uninhabitable by the species that discovered them. We seek to transform wastelands into gardens, not to contest existing territorial claims. Our expansion threatens no one who maintains their worlds properly. The Arcturian delegate, representing one of the galaxy's oldest civilizations, rose with deliberate ceremony. The Arcturian Republic recognizes the validity of human terraforming claims. We propose that the Council establish formal protocols for terraforming-based settlement rights, including mandatory notification periods and technological sharing agreements. Sarah's heart raced as she realized what was happening. The Arcturians were not just supporting humanity's claim to Kepler 442c. They were proposing a complete revision of galactic settlement law that would legitimize human expansion throughout the galaxy. The proposal would force every species to either contest the claim immediately or accept human presence on their uninhabitable worlds. The Zephyrian delegation erupted in angry protests. But their objections were drowned out by representatives eager to establish their own positions before the vote. The Kyoth Commonwealth demanded protection for worlds within their established sphere of influence. The Rigel Confederacy proposed joint terraforming ventures that would share the benefits of human technology. Even the notoriously isolationist vegan collective expressed interest in human assistance with their own marginal worlds. Hours passed as the debate raged through the chamber. Sarah found herself answering increasingly detailed questions about terraforming technology, defensive capabilities, and human expansion plans. With each answer, she could see the Council's perception of humanity shifting from that of a minor species to a potential galactic power. Finally, the Nexari mediator called for formal voting procedures. The Council will vote on 3 separate motions. First, recognition of human settlement rights on Kepler 442c under existing terraforming provisions. Second, establishment of formal protocols for terraforming-based territorial claims. Third, mandatory technology sharing agreements for species undertaking large-scale terraforming operations. The first vote was closer than Sarah had hoped, but ultimately successful. 26 species voted to recognize human settlement rights, 18 voted against and 3 abstained. The Zephyrians had lost their legal challenge, but the narrow margin suggested that future expansion would face significant opposition. The second vote established humanity as a legitimate player in galactic politics. The new protocols would require advance notification of terraforming operations and allow existing territorial holders to object within specified timeframes. More importantly, they established terraforming as a recognized method of territorial expansion, something that had never been explicitly codified in galactic law. The third vote failed, much to Sarah's relief. Mandatory technology sharing would have forced humanity to reveal terraforming secrets that represented their primary strategic advantage. Instead, the Council approved voluntary cooperation agreements that would allow selective sharing of techniques and resources. As the session concluded, Sarah found herself surrounded by representatives from dozens of species, each eager to discuss potential cooperation agreements. The Volari Federation offered joint research partnerships. The Hegemony Collective proposed mutual defense pacts. Even some Zephyrian representatives, clearly acting without official approval, inquired about limited technology exchanges. Commander Crakes approached as the chamber began to empty. "You have accomplished something remarkable today. Lieutenant Chen, the Empire will not forget this demonstration of human capabilities. I hope your Empire will consider the benefits of cooperation over competition," Sarah replied diplomatically. Crakes' scales shifted to colors Sarah had learned indicated thoughtful consideration. "Perhaps. The galaxy is vast enough for both our species if we can learn to coexist." As Sarah prepared to return to Kepler 442c, she reflected on how much had changed in 6 months. What had begun as a desperate mission to establish a single forward base had evolved into a complete transformation of humanity's position in galactic affairs. The wasteland she had been sent to transform had indeed sprouted a banner. But that banner now flew over more than just New Eden Station. It flew over humanity's future among the stars. 6 months after her arrival on Kepler 442c, Sarah stood atop the observation tower that now rose 50 meters above New Eden Station's main complex. The view that spread before her would have been impossible to imagine during those first desperate weeks of survival. Where once there had been only barren wasteland and toxic storms, a thriving ecosystem now stretched to the horizon. The atmospheric processors had long since completed their primary function. The planet's sky showed patches of blue between the scattered clouds, and rain that fell from those clouds nourished earth plants that had adapted to thrive in alien soil. Rivers flowed through valleys that had been dry for millions of years, fed by underground springs that the terraforming process had somehow awakened. Below her, construction drones worked continuously to expand the settlement's infrastructure. Residential modules capable of housing 1,000 colonists were nearing completion, while manufacturing facilities produced everything from advanced electronics to basic agricultural equipment. The quantum communicator that had once limited her to 3 minutes of weekly contact with Earth now coordinated with a network of relay stations that provided constant communication with human space. The transformation was remarkable, but it was not what filled Sarah with the deepest sense of accomplishment. That honor belonged to the banner that flew from the tower's peak, a simple design that had become known throughout the galaxy, as the symbol of human determination. The blue field represented the sky they had created from poison gases. The green stripe symbolized life growing where none had existed before. The stars scattered across its surface marked every world where humanity now had a presence. "Lieutenant, the transport from Earth has entered orbit," announced her aide, a young engineer named Marcus who had arrived with the first wave of colonists 3 months ago. "Admiral Morrison requests permission to land," Sarah nodded, checking her chronometer. The Admiral's arrival marked exactly 6 months since her deployment, the original timeline for what was supposed to be a simple survey mission. Instead, she was about to brief the head of Earth Space Forces on humanity's expansion into 47 star systems. The transport touched down in the settlement's main landing area, a paved expanse that could accommodate vessels up to cruiser size. Sarah watched through her office windows as Admiral Morrison emerged, followed by a delegation that included representatives from Earth's government, scientific community, and military leadership. She met them at the transport's ramp, still wearing the practical work clothes that had become her standard uniform during the terraforming process. The contrast with the delegation's formal attire was stark, but Sarah had long since stopped caring about military protocol when there was work to be done. "Lieutenant Chen," Admiral Morrison said formally, returning her salute before breaking into a smile. "Outstanding work. Your mission reports have transformed our understanding of human capabilities." "Thank you, sir," Sarah replied, though I should point out that this is no longer a military operation. New Eden Station is now a civilian colony with over 800 permanent residents. The Admiral nodded, gesturing toward the thriving settlement around them, "which brings us to why we're here. Earth Command wants a full briefing on terraforming capabilities and expansion potential. The Galactic Council's recognition of our territorial claims has created opportunities we never anticipated." Over the following hours, Sarah led the delegation through every aspect of the terraforming operation. They examined atmospheric processors, studied modified plant genetics, and observed the integration of Earth technology with alien environments. The scientists peppered her with questions about soil composition, atmospheric chemistry, and biological adaptation rates. Most importantly, they discussed the strategic implications of humanity's new capabilities. The ability to transform uninhabitable worlds into thriving colonies had fundamentally altered the balance of power in the galaxy. Species that had dismissed humanity as a minor civilization now competed for favorable trading agreements and defense partnerships. The Zephyrian Empire has requested formal diplomatic negotiations, Admiral Morrison reported during their private briefing session. "They're offering mutual non-aggression pacts and technology exchange agreements." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "6 months ago, they were trying to eliminate our presence here through military force. 6 months ago, they didn't understand what humanity was capable of achieving," the Admiral replied. "Commander Craig's reports appear to have convinced their leadership that cooperation serves their interests better than conflict." They walked together through the settlement's agricultural zones, where earth crops grew alongside native plants that had been modified to process atmospheric toxins. The integration was so complete that it was difficult to determine where human intervention ended and natural adaptation began. How many worlds could support this type of terraforming? Admiral Morrison asked, examining a hybrid grain that thrived in the planet's mineral-rich soil. "According to our surveys, approximately 3,000 within 50 light-years of Earth," Sarah replied. "All of them currently classified as uninhabitable by their discoverers. We could establish a colonial empire larger than any current galactic power within a century." The implications were staggering. Humanity had always been constrained by the limited number of naturally habitable worlds within their reach. The ability to transform hostile environments removed that constraint entirely, opening vast regions of space that other species had written off as worthless. "What about resistance?" the Admiral asked. "The Zephyrians won't be the only species concerned about human expansion." Sarah considered the question carefully. "Some opposition is inevitable, but we have significant advantages. First, we're claiming worlds that nobody else wants. Second, our terraforming technology could benefit every species in the galaxy if they're willing to cooperate. Third, the legal precedent has been established through the Galactic Council." They reached the settlement's edge, where the transformed landscape met the planet's original hostile environment. The boundary was clearly visible, marked by the transition from green vegetation to barren rock and toxic atmosphere. Atmospheric processors continued their work beyond the boundary, slowly expanding the habitable zone at a rate of several kilometers per day. "This is what humanity represents now," Sarah said, gesturing toward the expanding green zone. "Not conquest or domination, but transformation and growth. We take what others consider worthless and turn it into something valuable." Admiral Morrison studied the advancing edge of terraformed landscape with obvious fascination. "Earth Command wants you to oversee the establishment of similar operations on 12 additional worlds. The first colonist transports are already being prepared." Sarah felt a surge of excitement at the prospect. New Eden Station had proven that human terraforming technology could transform the most hostile environments. But 12 simultaneous operations would demonstrate humanity's ability to reshape entire regions of space. "There's one more thing," the Admiral added. "The President wants to offer you a promotion to Colonel in command of the new Terraforming Corps. You'd be responsible for coordinating all human expansion operations." Sarah looked out across the settlement she had built from nothing, watching construction drones prepare landing pads for the colony ships that would soon arrive. In the distance, she could see the banner flying from the central tower, its colors bright against the alien sky she had helped create. "I accept," she said simply. As the sun set over New Eden Station, painting the transformed landscape in shades of gold and crimson, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she had been sent to a wasteland with orders to establish a forward operating base. Instead, she had planted the seeds of an empire that would span the galaxy. The wasteland had indeed sprouted a banner, and beneath that banner lay the remains of every assumption about human limitations that had ever been made. Humanity was no longer bound by the worlds they could find, but only by the worlds they could imagine. The age of human expansion had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same.